Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome you to today's webcast. We're going to be learning about how to deliver the right message at the right time and create momentum towards the decision. We'd like to remind you that this is part of our monthly webcast series for sales excellence. So go ahead and join us for all of these each month. It's great content, and we do this on the second Wednesday of every month at 8 in the morning Pacific time. So that's a great series to sign up for. We also have a live Twitter feed that we're going on right now. So if you'd like to follow along with that, you can go out to twitter.com and then enter the hashtag #TimeToThrive15. That will allow you to ask questions, engage with our presenters today, and just have a little bit of interactivity as we go. Joining us today is Dr. Tom Sant. I'd like to introduce him. He is an author of 3 very popular books, including The Persuasive Business Proposal. As you can see here from the quotes on the screen, he has one of the best-selling books on sales proposals. Really great content, so we're very fortunate to have Dr. Tom Sant with us today. Tom, I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
Well, thank you, Ryan. It's a real pleasure to be able to share some ideas with people that will help them, hopefully, win more business and at the same time do a little faster. The basic premise we have today is that if you can deliver the kind of content the customer cares about, you're going to win more often. Now, I know that sounds good. You're thinking to yourself, great, okay, but how do we do that? How do we win more business and do it faster? Well, as the title of our presentation has indicated, it's a matter of delivering the right message in the right order. Unfortunately, we often don't do that. In fact, most sales messages focus on the wrong stuff. For example, lots and lots of sales messages that go out are little more than a price quote. You know, they tell you what we're going to be selling you in terms of products or how many hours of consulting you're going to be getting, but they don't tell you that we understand why you need it. When we deliver what is fundamentally a price quote, what we're saying in a kind of subtle way is, you know what we provide and what we do is fundamentally a commodity. Because all I'm focusing on is price, that's probably all you ought to focus on as well. And the net effect of that is we diminish our chance of winning based on value. Now, another mistake people make is they focus on the product specs themselves, and that's a natural mistake to make. I was working last week with one of my clients who was responding to a complex request for a proposal from a city government here in North America, and that government wants to replace all of its financial and HR software, what's typically called an ERP system, Enterprise Resource Planning. This client is bidding on the opportunity and fundamentally had responded to the RFP exactly as written. But the problem was the RFP only focused on the technical specs. It didn't focus on why the city needed to make the change. What was wrong with the current system they were using? Why was it no longer able to meet their needs? What capabilities did it fail to offer that they needed? What were the financial, social, technical pressures they were responding to? See, those things typically don't appear in an RFP. But if you don't focus on them, then all you're offering is transactional business and not true solutions. We want to sell solutions. People want solutions in this economy. They shy away a little bit from doing just transactional business. A third kind of sales message that you see a lot, oddly enough, is the company history. I would guess that nearly a third of all the sales proposals and presentations that I see, and I see upwards of 1,000 a year from various sectors of the industry, various kinds of businesses, small to enormous, nearly a third of them start out talking about the vendor, their own company history. And it's almost never interesting. I mean, one of my clients is Wells Fargo. They actually have an interesting company history. They delivered gold bullion via stagecoach, and they had to fight off bad guys who were robbing the stagecoaches, and Black Bart would steal them. It was pretty fascinating. In fact, back in the 60s, there was actually a TV show called Tales of Wells Fargo. because it was so fascinating. And even their company history doesn't belong up front. Why? Because if you start with your own story, what you're fundamentally telling the customer is, look, this isn't about you. It's about us. I'm going to be delivering a self-centered message to you. Now, I'm happy to tell you that in spite of having a really interesting company history, Wells Fargo does not start that way because they've adopted the method I'm about to show you, and they're very happy with it. They're winning more business, and they're doing it faster. Well, these three methods are pretty typical, unfortunately. Lots and lots of presentations and proposals go out. In fact, you know, I mentioned to you that a third of all the proposals and presentations, roughly, start with the company history. I guess the question you'd ask is, why? Why? Do you think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, boy, I hope I get a pitch from somebody that starts off with their company history? I would love to hear a really good company history story. Nobody wakes up thinking that. That's not what they're looking for. All right, so what are they looking for? Lowest price, or best value, or the least risk, or the most experience, or prior history of working with them, or the ability to create strong partnerships and good relationships? Those things might be key factors. But I'll tell you what, in a business-to-business environment, our customers fundamentally, right up front, want answers to three questions. These are the three questions they need to have answered when they're making a buying decision, and they need them answered in this order. That's an important point. If you get them out of order, it doesn't work. So what are the three questions? Number one, are we getting what we need? Is this actually what we need? Does this address our issues, our problems, our needs? If we focus on that, we're likely to get their attention. Wow, these folks are actually telling us about our business in a way that shows they get it. They understand what we're trying to do here. So question number two. Yeah, but is it worth doing? Is it actually worth making the effort, investing the money and the time, putting my career at risk to implement some kind of solution? Will the payoff be there? What's the return on investment? Now here it's not about whether they trust you. It's not about whether they think you can do the job. That's not it. The question they're asking is, okay, yeah, they're right. We have this problem. We acknowledge that. We have a need here. But we have a lot of other needs too. Is this the one we should be focusing on right now? Is this the one that's going to pay off? What's the return from making the effort here versus the return from making the effort someplace else? You know, if you're selling a SharePoint database system to store account information, you may not be competing against another database. You may not be competing against another Microsoft partner. You may be competing against building a new parking lot. And there may be some totally unrelated use for those funds which they think is worth more than what you're proposing to do. So we have to answer this question. We have to show them, here's the potential return from solving the problem. And show them, this is worth doing. You know, we've calculated the potential for you. It's big. Once we've answered those two questions, the third question is, can they really do it? Show me that they can actually deliver this project on time, on budget. They can do it really in a professional way so that we have little risk and a high probability of getting exactly what we expect. These three questions, this is not arbitrary. This is hardwired into the brain. This is how we have evolved in order to make choices which involve spending money, allocating resources. The reality is that our consciousness is intentional. As you are well aware, we're surrounded by billions and billions of data points, as Carl Sagan might have said. Billions of bits of information that are bombarding us. And our brain has the ability to screen out the vast majority of them. We ignore them. And instead, based on what we're trying to accomplish, we focus in on only what matters. Have you ever had the experience of being in a new city? You're in a rental car. You're not familiar with how the controls are laid out. It's a little awkward. You don't know where you're going. You're driving, and you just, without even thinking about it, turn the radio off. Why do you do that? Because there's too much overload. Not knowing the city, not knowing the street names, trying to figure out from the GPS or the map you've got where you're headed, trying to control the car, look at all the traffic, just too much. So we minimize the amount of data that's flooding us by getting rid of the extraneous. Well, in an unconscious way, our brain does that all the time. And in a business setting, there are three kinds of information, three kinds of messages we need, and that defines what we look for. Sometimes what we want is just facts. We want to know the details. And when we're looking for facts, there's a pattern we want to see those facts presented in. It's basically the pattern that's used in journalism. I was reading the Wall Street Journal this morning, and I was reading an article, and it was laid out exactly that way, with the most important fact first, and then the next, and the next. And so it kind of drilled down into the details. Sometimes, though, what we want is an expert opinion. It's not so much the facts I care about. It's what do you, as my CPA, what do you as my attorney, what do you as my IT consultant think these facts mean? What are they telling you? And so there we have to structure it a little differently. We need to present that opinion in a way that it's clear and defensible and understandable. And part of that challenge is to lay out right up front what it is we're offering our opinion on. Could be a person, could be a technology, could be a course of action, whatever it is. What is it you're giving me an opinion on? And what are the criteria you've used to reach that opinion? So then we show our observations as an expert vis-a-vis the criteria, and at the end, then when we offer our opinion, this is your best course of action, this is what it's worth, this is what you should do, it makes sense. We can see where it came from. But if our purpose, if our intention is to make a decision, then what we're looking for is something entirely different. Because decision-making is, from the customer's point of view, the same action as what we engage in when we try to persuade. Persuasion is the flip side of decision-making. Persuasion is the format we use when we try to help people make choices. And that's where those three questions come in. Research that was done by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two psychologists, into the processes by which decision-making is framed, resulted in Kahneman receiving the Nobel Prize in Economics. Now think about that. He's a psychologist, but they gave him the Nobel Prize in Economics because of this fundamental, groundbreaking research into how people actually think when they're making choices in the real world. And what did Kahneman and Tversky uncover? That they follow those three questions. Am I getting what I need? Is it worth doing? Can this person, this vendor, actually deliver? So what does that tell us? It tells us then that we need to follow a pattern, a persuasive structure that matches up to the question. So that's what we're talking about when we say the right content in the right order. Rather than our company history, what we need to start off is a brief, succinct, and specific statement of our understanding of the customer's needs, problems, issues, challenges, opportunities, whatever it is that's driving the opportunity. Not just restating the requirements from an RFP, no, but actually talking about the business issues that lie behind it. Here's what you need. If you do that, right away you're going to get their attention. They're going to go, oh my gosh, these people actually get it. They understand us. And then the second step, which if you don't understand the decision process is a little bit counterintuitive, is you focus on outcomes. What happens if you solve these problems? What happens if you meet these needs? What are the outcomes, results, or impact you'll get as a result? And of course, that's answering the second question, isn't it? Is it worth doing? Both of these, notice, appeal to the decision maker's emotions. And that's a critical fact. Why? Because as Kahneman's research, in fact, he's got a book that came out just last year called Thinking Fast and Slow. You might want to take a look at it. And by the way, I'm sure Tversky, his partner, would have received a Nobel Prize in economics as well, except he unfortunately passed away before it was awarded. So Kahneman received it on his behalf. And in this new book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he pays full tribute to his partner, Amos Tversky. But what they found was there are two systems that people use for thinking. The first is quick, intuitive, and emotional. The second is logical, ponderous, rational. We always use system one, the emotional. And then, if it's an important decision or it's complicated, we may engage system two. That's why it's so critical right up front to engage them emotionally. I know where your pain is, and I know how much you can gain if you get rid of that pain. It's a rational argument, but it also engages the emotion. This was backed up, by the way, by research that was done by Antonio Damasio at the University of Southern California Center for Brain Research, where he found that people who had suffered brain injuries, where the part of the brain that forms emotions had been destroyed, although these people continued to live a reasonably normal life, they could do many of the things we associate with being a self-sufficient person. The one thing they couldn't do anymore is make a decision, because they could no longer generate any emotion. And so their decisions would seem arbitrary and bizarre. Well, they were, because there was no inclination towards one direction or another. It was just random. They really were in a state of confusion without the emotional impulse to choose this or that. All right, so the needs and the outcomes are the first two elements of our better messaging strategy. What comes next? What comes next is recommending a solution. And we do need to recommend it. I often see proposals, particularly in the high-tech environment, which oddly enough don't recommend anything. They describe a product. They describe a technology. They'll say something like, one way to handle this would be to implement. Well, are you recommending that or not? We need to actually say, we recommend, so that it sounds like you believe in it. Again, it's that emotional transference. And the final step, prove to me you can deliver on time, on budget. Give me some evidence. What separates you from others who can do similar kinds of work? I call this the NOSE structure, needs, outcomes, solutions, evidence, because NOSE obviously is the acronym for that. But it's an important element of delivering the right message, because as you can see, it does respond to the three questions that people want to know. Are we getting what we need? Is this relevant to us? Is it worth doing? This is where motivation to take action comes from. If you find that people often delay, put off, or even do something else than what you're recommending, it's probably because you haven't shown enough value from taking action to motivate them to want to say yes. And then the third question, of course, that's the solution and the evidence, the rational justification. This is where system two thinking, as Kahneman calls it, enters the arena. Well, that pattern clearly answers the three questions. But how do we write an executive summary? How do we put together a PowerPoint slide deck that's built on that? Well, what I recommend is that you try to answer 7 questions about the opportunity. The first 2 are about the needs. What is the customer's problem? What's the need, the issue? Why does it matter to them? What makes this a problem, if you will? We'll talk about that in a minute. Then the third and fourth questions are about outcomes. Okay, so what are they looking to accomplish? What results do they hope to see? How will they measure success? And typically there's lots of different results they may want to see. They may want to see improvements in their finances. They may want to see decreased labor costs. They may want to see fewer errors. They may want to see more uptime from the network, whatever it may be. Which of those is most important? That's an important question. That's question number 4. Which of these kinds of results, which of these outcomes matters the most? Why? Because we need to know in order to frame up a value proposition based on what they care about the most. Our next 2 questions are about the solution itself. What do we have to offer? And of course, being Microsoft partners, you've got a wealth of things you can offer. You have multiple ways you can solve problems, usually. So the next question is, and of the things we can do, what's the best fit? For this client to solve their problems, to deliver the results they care about, what's the best fit? This helps us avoid the appearance of making recommendations that are self-serving, that'll build up billable hours for us, but not necessarily serve the client's interests in the best possible way. By asking what's the best fit, we avoid that. Question number 7, what makes us the right choice? Why us? So if you can answer these 7 questions, then you can frame up a PowerPoint presentation or an executive summary which is going to be compelling and clear and result in the customer saying, these are the guys for us. I had a client last year who entered a whole new market. They went after the cruise ship lines and tried to sell their technology into that whole industry. They had never worked with them. So they targeted one of the leading companies in cruise ships, and they created a proposal for them, and they followed the 7 questions, and they used the nose format to write it up, and at the end, the CEO of the cruise line said, this is the best proposal we have ever received. Now, was it really? Well, in the sense that it delivered the right message in the right way, yeah, it probably was. So they entered a whole new industry, massive amount of success, simply by delivering their content in a better way. Because in the past, what they had focused on was the technology, how they implement, what are the systems they use, and so forth. And that doesn't sell. Similarly, I was in Copenhagen in October. We worked on a major bid from my client to a chain of hospitals throughout the Nordic region. I just got word 2 days ago. They won. And in winning, they got the maximum award, a 6-year contract that's worth over $40 million. Why? Because they delivered the message the right way. They showed the value and the impact of what they can offer. And what they're offering is very low-level technical services, but in a way that delivers significant value. So this does work. In fact, a survey of over 400 companies who have implemented this approach, this nose pattern, shows that on average, win rates went up 38%. No additional work, no additional leads required, but 38% more wins. So if you're looking for that, I recommend you consider using this nose pattern. Well, having said all that, it's obvious that it's a little harder than just sitting down and doing it. So let's talk about those 7 questions. Which of these 7 questions to you seem the hardest to answer? In my experience, the challenge usually is on the left-hand side of that column. Certainly questions 1 and 2, what's the client's problem or issue, and why is it a problem? These can be tricky. And they're particularly tricky if you're a sales support person who has to create the PowerPoint deck or has to create the proposal, but you haven't had direct contact with the customer. That can be very tricky. You need to get answers from the client, from your contacts there, as to what the real issues are that lie behind this opportunity. If there's a bid document or if it's just proactive and you're just putting together. You need to be able to answer the key questions. Now, needs are what define your customer's key concerns. It could be financial, it could be about productivity or quality, meeting a demanding schedule. Maybe they're going through mergers or acquisitions, or maybe they're divesting. They have challenges, and they need help. What we need to do is uncover those needs in the most specific way possible. And I know of 4 good ways to do it, and you probably do too. You probably do this. One is listening to the customer, asking questions, but then listening to the answers. Or if you can't get directly to the customer, maybe to somebody who has good insight into the customer, an internal champion, or maybe a colleague of yours who's worked with them in the past. You can ask 5 whys. This is a technique from the Six Sigma quality methodology, and it's a way of getting to root cause. You can go on the web, fire up Bing and do a little research. Just a few questions can tell you a whole lot. And finally, last resort, but still better than nothing, better than the company history, right? Last resort, think about who are similar companies, nonprofits, government agencies that we've worked with, and what do they need? Because it's possible that this new prospect might have similar issues to what our previous prospects who are similar to them have had. Well, you know how to do this. I mean, in terms of listening to the client, you want to ask the kinds of open-ended questions that you're taught to do in typical consultative sales training programs. What are your objectives? What's not working? Who's affected? So on. But the key is to listen to the answers. One of the wisest people I know in the area of sales process and methodology, a guy named Neil Rackham, who wrote the book Spin Selling, among other really good books. He and I were having dinner one night before we jointly presented at a conference. And I said, what are the biggest problems you see with people who try to use spin selling? He said, the biggest problem that I see is that they think it's all about asking questions. Now, if you've read Spin Selling, that might seem like a funny comment because the whole book's about asking the right question. But he said, obviously, simply asking the question's not enough. You have to listen to the answers. And I went, oh, of course. But he said, I've seen salespeople who will have their 5 or 6 or 7 key questions, and they go through them, and somehow they think it's like magic. If I ask the question, presto, I will get the business. He said, they don't hear really interesting insights they could follow up on. So use the question as, a conversation starter. Try to get deeper. If possible, push back, challenge a little bit, engage them, but do try to have a meaningful conversation. As I mentioned, asking 5 whys. Why does this matter? Why is it important now? Why? Acting like a 4-year-old. This is a technique that's used in the Six Sigma quality methodology, and it works very well with customers, too. You just have to make sure you don't wear out your welcome by, being annoying about it. But make it clear to the customer that the deeper you can go in understanding what matters to them, the better job you can do in building the system, the tools, the infrastructure that they need. Researching the client? Well, open up Bing and go out and find their website. What do they say about themselves? What are their key issues? If they're publicly traded, go to the financial section. Look at their mission statement. Look at their annual report. Look at the 10K documents. The 10Ks are filed quarterly, and under SEC regulations, they are required to tell you, as a potential investor, where are the risks. And in fact, they are included in a section called Risks. You will find some very interesting material there, things you can use, possibly to start the conversation, possibly to reinforce the message in your PowerPoint or your executive summary. Go to Reuters.com or Hoovers.com. Who are their key competitors? What's their market position? How are they doing? Are they growing? Are they declining? Who are the key executives? What press releases have they put out recently? If you find names of key executives, search on those. Put in their name plus the plus sign and PPT. Every PowerPoint presentation that executive has given or in which he or she was mentioned will come back to you. And you can learn a lot about what they think really matters. Finally, quick look at their key competitors. What's the difference? What's the difference in tone, style, method, products? Do you get a sense of what makes them different from the competition? You might want to pick up on some of those cultural nuances in your presentation. For example, if you're pitching to a company that specializes in organic foods, it might be smart to include some imagery that suggests you think being organic and natural is a good idea. And you might want to avoid things that suggest highly processed foods, right? Finally, the comparables. Think about who have we worked with in the past that's similar to this client, and what did we sell them, or at least propose to them? Why'd they need it? What made it urgent for them to get it? And why couldn't they do it on their own? Well, these will give you insights into customer needs. The second set of questions that I think are sometimes very hard to answer. What do they want in terms of results? What's going to motivate this customer to say yes? What kind of value is really going to trigger a positive reaction on their part? To get to that, I think there's some things we need to be aware of. First of all, smart buyers, intelligent buyers, really are looking for positive impact. And it's positive impact that transcends the function of the software or the products that we're recommending to them. It gets into the core performance of the organization itself, making more money, reducing cost of operations, reducing carbon footprint, making sure we're compliant with regulations, and so on. These are very fundamental measures of performance. So if we're just talking, as the old cliche goes, speeds and feeds, we're probably missing the point. We need to see how those speeds and feeds translate into meaningful measures of business performance for this client. And when I say business, obviously it could be a nonprofit, it could be a university, it could be a state, local, federal government agency. But everybody's got metrics they're looking at where they want to see results. In fact, typically, people are looking for value in one or more of three areas. The first one, and the one that often occurs to us, is what we might call strategic value. Strategic value are the kinds of things that show up on the profit and loss statement, that show up in the annual report. So market share, head count, speed to market, revenue, profitability. These are the kinds of things that people track to see how is the business doing. And I would urge you, brainstorm. Think about what are the kinds of strategic value your customers seek. And remember, strategic value, that's the core measures of business performance. If you're dealing with a government agency, then it would be things like mission completion, budgetary compliance, and so on. Okay, so those are good, but that's not the only kind of value, and sometimes it's not the most important. Sometimes what people are looking for is what we might call tactical value. They need to automate something that's labor-intensive. One of the things we discovered in working on that ERP proposal last week was that the city has to do a lot of manual rework because it has two systems which are incompatible. And so clerks have to rekey massive amounts of data from one system into another in order to complete all the financials for the city. It's time-consuming, it's expensive, and it's fraught with error. So what they're looking for is a tactical value. They need to automate the transfer of data so that it's seamless, so there's a single source of truth for the city. If you're dealing with somebody who's in pharmaceuticals, they may need to meet FDA standards. If you're dealing with somebody in banking, they may need to have certain kinds of measures of security or redundancy or disaster recovery in order to be fully licensable. Tactical outcomes can be just as valuable, if not more so, to a buyer than the strategic ones. Because tactical value has an impact on operational efficiency. It enables the organization to do its job with maximum efficiency. The third one, social or political value, affects people and communities. Internally, it might be such things as improving the morale of employees, or reducing absenteeism, or reducing labor strife, or decreasing the amount of turnover within the turnover in the American sense of the number of employees who are quitting or need to be replaced. Outside the company, it might be about integrating more effectively with our suppliers, or reducing our carbon footprint, or supporting our communities more effectively. Social and political value certainly has a place in the decision maker's framework, and for some companies, it is a critical factor. Now, one of the things you saw was that all of these values overlap. There was an interesting study in the Harvard Business Review 2 years ago about the impact on companies' profit and loss statement of pursuing a sustainability agenda. In other words, by trying to reduce their carbon consumption and their energy usage, what happens to their financials? A clear overlap between social value and strategic value. And what the research showed was companies that pursue an aggressive sustainability agenda make more money. They're more profitable. All right, well, here are 20 kinds of outcomes that your customers might be seeking, and these are based on the kinds of things we see with IT consulting. So there may be some things here that resonate with you. When you download this deck, if you choose to do that, you can look at these in more detail. It's by no means an exhaustive list of outcomes. There are many more. My point here is twofold. Number one, the more specific you can be about the outcomes the customer gets, the more believable they are. And secondly, we must prioritize. Just giving them a list of potential outcomes doesn't work. Some of these will be relevant to the given opportunity you're bidding for. Others simply have no relevance at all. Only focus on the ones that matter, and then try to make sure that the one that matters the most is the one that you feature prominently right up front. The goal is, once we've got the insight and we know the area of impact that the customer is seeking, they want to, let's say, automate something that's labor intensive, then it's up to us to show them how important that is so we answer that question, is it worth doing? So from going from automating a labor-intensive process to, and what is that worth to you? Quantify the value. Once we've done that, and then show, and you will get more of that value if you choose us, because there are things about the way we work and the products we deliver that are different. Those differentiators add more value. And here's the proof. That's step 4. Prove it. Case studies, references, accolades from independent third parties, things that establish you really can do it. So let's talk briefly about some of these strategies to be as effective as possible. In quantifying the impact, our first challenge is to establish the starting point. How are they doing right now? If it's a city and they are rekeying data to get from one system to another, because these two systems don't talk to each other, well, how much time are they spending on that? How many hours are their clerks spending rekeying data? And what do those clerks get paid? And what are the benefits worth? And what is the cost of a delay in getting their financials reported? These are some of the baseline data. Now, the client may know that, or we may need to go in and do a little bit of analysis and find out how bad it is. Or they may say, no, don't talk to anybody. So we can go out to industry sources or our own experience with other clients and offer some hypothetical or some estimates to show how big the problem actually is. Great. So we know they're probably spending as much as 100 hours a month with 3 clerks rekeying financial data. The average charge rate is, fully loaded with benefits, is $20. So that's $2,000 a month, or $24,000 a year of waste going just to transfer data from one to another. That's the potential gain. So what is that worth to them? Well, it's worth $24,000, but then there's that other subtle factor. What happens if their financials are late? What happens to the city's credit rating? What happens to their elected officials? And now we start getting a bigger but harder to quantify impact. Once you can monetize the impact, once you've got the baseline data, and then can agree upon the potential gain, you can show them how big it is. For example, I worked recently on an opportunity where out of a $3 million effort, 20% of it was involving manual activity that could be automated. My client felt they could reduce manual work from 20% of the total down to less than 5%. On a $3 million effort, that meant the potential impact was they would save $450,000. That's a huge gain, way in excess of what the customer would have to pay for their services. So the return on investment was clear. I'm not just pretending this is easy, but if you'll make the effort to develop this kind of insight, both into needs and into outcomes, quantify it and display it, you're going to get such powerful results that is going to make a huge difference in those win rates. This is the kind of thinking your customer wants to see you doing. And if we do it and we present it to them in the right order, they're going to be happy. Now, as you know, the final elements are the solutions. What are the things we can do and what's the best fit? And here, we just want to avoid the temptation of taking all that wonderful technical content we've got sitting in thumb drives all over the office and just dumping it into our presentation or our proposal. That doesn't work. Now, here's an example from an executive summary, and I understand that when we're within the ecosystem, as it were, and this is the language we use on an everyday basis, it becomes difficult to hear it the way a customer might hear it. But it's very hard to translate this into plain language for a customer. We need to do that for them. Microsoft Online Services offer unparalleled email security. Well, so far we're okay. With multi-layered now what's a multi-layered antivirus and anti-spam filter? What does that mean? BPA, what is that? Is currently seeking SAS 70 Type 2. What is that? You can see that very quickly we get into a level of technical detail and jargon, including product names, which are jargon, that is going to absolutely derail the customer's understanding. So keep it simple, especially in your PowerPoint presentation and especially in your executive summary, and focus on what's relevant. We have to stop selling the technology, and I say this with all due respect because the products and the technology are fantastic. But, you know, it's been a few years since Nicholas Carr pointed out nobody's buying technology anymore. They're buying solutions. And I suppose this was always the case to some degree, but there was a point at which everybody needed to buy technology just to stay in the game. Well, now, the fundamental technology is kind of like having electricity in your office. Kind of a given, isn't it? What we have to start focusing on is getting out of that transactional mode and into displaying how we are solving problems, how we transform the way business is done, how we help them do better, increasing efficiency, increasing effectiveness, increasing bottom line performance. One way to do this, a better approach, I think, than what we sometimes do, is to do a more integrated solution. And the key here is to recognize that right up front we need to position what we're recommending in terms of why it's relevant for them. This is not a product name. This is a functional capability we're delivering. Then tell them how you're going to deliver it. And this is where you could introduce the product name, but only after you've explained what it does. And then you can get into the details of what it's going to do for them, not by talking about product features, but instead by talking about what they need. So you need the ability to do X. The two features of this recommendation we're making that will deliver X are A and B. The benefits to you will be And it's been used in this environment and produced this kind of results. Now, another thing that you need is why. The product features that will help you with that are C and D, the benefit to you, and so on. That approach is going to be more understandable to the customer. Again, we're delivering the right information in the right order. Final question, why are we the right choice? Why are we the ones that should do this work for you? And that's really a matter of presenting differentiators that they will recognize are relevant and powerful. Research indicates that when people are buying services, which I'm sure many of you are selling, you're selling technical services and intellectual capabilities, the areas that customers care about the most are, first of all, how do you do the work? What are your methods, your best practices? What have you developed in terms of proven methodology that enables you to do this work, do it efficiently, deliver it on time and on budget? Secondly, very closely related, as you can see, how do you manage a project? How do you make sure that things stay on track? What happens if your project manager breaks her leg skiing and is out of the office for 2 months? What happens? What happens if there's a cost overrun? How do you manage scope creep? What are the things you do to make sure we stay focused and we don't allow the project to drift? All those core things that are part of good project management, they want to see what you have that enables you to do it effectively. Now, because service is delivered by people, the third thing they care about is the people. Who are these people you're putting on our project? Are they qualified? Are they experienced? Do they know what they're doing? Have they provided or been provided with the skills and the tools they need to be efficient? Are they leaders? Do they participate in industry groups? Have they achieved certifications? These are the kinds of things that help your team stand out compared to somebody else. And finally, do you have any equipment, tools, facilities that might help set you apart? I was in the UK last spring working with a client. Every proposal they put out mentioned the fact they have 26 locations. 26 locations throughout the UK and Ireland. I said to them, why would that matter if you're pitching your business to someone who only has one location? Oh, maybe it doesn't. So we took it out as a standard default differentiator, but it's very powerful if they're pitching business to somebody who does have multiple locations, because they have more locations, more on-the-ground teams that are nearby than any of their competitors. So think about the equipment, facilities, tools, things you have, and then think about, and when do these things matter? Well, we've gone through the basic structure. We understand that we need to tell the customer what they want to hear. And what is that? The answer to 3 questions. Am I getting what I need? Is it worth doing? And can this vendor actually deliver? To deliver that message to them in the right order, I recommend you get a nose job. And by that, of course, I mean using that nose structure. Needs, outcomes, solutions, evidence. When you build out your presentation of the needs, focus on business needs, organizational needs, not technical requirements. Technical requirements are the minimum that you need to deliver in order to be in the game. But understanding the actual business needs is what's going to set you apart as a provider of a real solution. Fourth, when it comes time to present the outcomes to answer the question of is it worth doing, make sure you're offering specific outcomes which have been prioritized in the same order the customer would have prioritized them, and whenever possible, make the effort to quantify that potential impact. Now, sometimes it's hard to figure out how much it's worth. There is nothing wrong with doing estimates or offering case studies from other clients that shows how much gain, how much benefit one of your other clients got, and allow the customer to draw his or her own conclusions from that. The one mistake you want to avoid is refraining from offering any value at all simply because you can't guarantee that they'll get this value. Instead, use the language appropriate to say that we estimate that, or based on what we know now, yeah, you know, you're kind of hedging, but you have to. There's things you can't control. And the customer understands that. As long as you're doing a reasonable job of quantifying the outcomes, they will appreciate that and it will have the right impact. Finally, make sure that in presenting the solution and the evidence that we're doing it from a client-centered point of view and that we're not just offering data dumps. We're not just offering rote lists of differentiators which may or not be relevant. Think about what's going to work for this client and do the best you can to offer solutions and evidence that actually will appeal to them and be understandable by them. Well, with that, we've kind of covered the ground. We've talked about how we can establish a strong sense of trust in the customer and that they will respond effectively to our message, we'll deliver it in the right way. And if there are any, I'd be happy to open up the conversation for questions. I'd like to mention, by the way, that I've provided 2 chapters of my book on proposal writing, Persuasive Business Proposals, on the website, which you can download. These are PDFs, and they go into more detail on these 2 critical areas of defining the customer's needs and then articulating the outcomes. So if you are interested in this and you think this is helpful, I invite you to go to the website and look and feel free to download those, because I tried to give you the depth here, but the reality is, in 1 hour we can only do so much. So perhaps that will supplement for you as well and give you some opportunity to refine your own messages further. Well, Ryan, do we have some questions?
Yeah, looking through the Q&A manager here, I've not seen anything come in yet, but we do want to remind the audience, if you do have a question, now is a great time. Go ahead and send that in via the Q&A pane at the top of your screen. Just go ahead and click on that, type on your question there, and we'll go ahead and get those rolling here in just a moment. We also want to just call out to everyone that we will have a continuation of this discussion on LinkedIn today, so if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, we'll be headed on over to LinkedIn as part of the Microsoft Sales Specialist group there, just to continue the discussion here with Tom and to ask those questions. And what I would love to do here at this point is also just go ahead and launch our survey. This is our event survey. We'd love to have you spend just a very few quick minutes of your time just going through and answering some of these questions we have. We really like to hear how we're doing. We'd like to see what you'd like to see in content moving forward. And, how did we do? I mean, how did you like the content today? Did you find it relevant, et cetera? So you can go ahead and see that survey. It just launched on your screens. You can go ahead and follow those through. Tom, I am not seeing any questions coming in at this point. I don't know if there's any general questions that you typically get that would be of value here to go through, but while we're waiting, but certainly we'll keep the Q&A pane open here.
One of the questions that sometimes comes up, people will ask, I got a request for proposal from a client, and the first section is, tell us about yourself. Give us the profile, your financials, your background, your history, all that. So doesn't that fly in the face of what you're saying, that that you shouldn't start off with your company history? But what I'm talking about is the message we deliver right up front in the executive summary. Or I'm talking about the message we deliver when we're making a presentation to a client before we ever get to the proposal stage. It's true that sometimes in these RFPs or RFQs, they want a bit of vendor information so they can weed out those who aren't really qualified. But before we ever get to that, I strongly urge you, create an executive summary that follows the nose pattern. A page, 2 pages, show them what we get it. We're thinking the way you're thinking. It's going to set the whole stage. There's this phenomenon in psychology known as the primacy principle, the principle of first impressions. And it's that first impression you create right away, in the way you say it and what you're saying, that's going to have a positive or negative impact on the way they perceive the rest of your message. And it's absolutely vital to get that right. So I just want to reinforce the importance of that part of what we're talking about, getting that early message constructed correctly.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, Tom. As a person who's written a few of these proposals, I think that's kind of the way of thinking, right? Where we typically I would have led off with a, hey, here's about us, here's why it's important, and I think it's rather eye-opening to see, hey, gosh, there's a better strategy out there, and it works.
It really does. 39% improvement in win rate across 400 companies, I think, is good empirical evidence that what we're talking about transcends specific opportunities, and is really, as you say, a better way of thinking.
Absolutely. While we're waiting here to see if there are any questions, any other? Actually, I'm sorry, we have one that just popped in. So let me go ahead and read it right now. Mm-hmm. Janine asks, what happens when the people you're working with, usually in IT, can't answer the questions about why this matters, and they don't really want to introduce you to anyone else in the business who can answer those questions? I think that's a real common thing we run into. I mean, how can you answer the questions if they don't know and they won't give you access to who can?
Well, we probably have to resort then to the strategy of using comparables or doing research. Sometimes by doing research, you can gain insights into that client that go beyond what the IT manager is willing to share with you. I remember an opportunity I was working on for a client where they were proposing a whole complex project, involved a lot of training and IT upgrades. And I asked, and why do they need this? And this was on a conference call. The call just got dead silent. Nobody knew why they needed it. They just knew they wanted it based on the RFP. I went out to the web, and while we were talking, I just, fired up Bing and entered the client's name and looked for a few articles. And I found an article in the New York Times that indicated that they had had a major earnings failure, and it was related to some IT infrastructure issues. And I said, guys, I think I got it. It was there. Even if you can't do that, you can at least think about who have we worked with who's similar and what did they need. And you say something like, although these may not be your issues, many of our clients have faced the following challenges. Bing, bing, boom, boom. And chances are you're going to hit on one or two of them. It's not ideal, but it's better than starting off with just generic language about technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Got another one here. Rick asks, this is a really good question, actually. Are there any suggestions for addressing the competition, and here's the twist, when the competition is the client's own internal IT staff? Yeah.
One of the challenges that we face is that if we're trying to win business, we may be taking it away from, that internal staff. So how do we position that so that we're not insulting them, because pretty quickly they're going to become either our partners or our masters in doing this work. And I think the strategy is to emphasize that within the realm of needs, the internal staff has a core strategic function of keeping the technical environment operating and efficient. And because of the tendency in recent years to drive costs out of these internal operations, these non-revenue operations, many of them are understaffed, which means they can't do the specialized kinds of work. So our job is to supplement what the internal staff can do. That means we're here as your experts on call. You've got a core business responsibility, keeping things working. We're here to help you make the transition to the next generation of technology or to implement the new projects that are simply not capable, that you're simply not capable of because of constraints. So that's an approach. I mean, you got to find a way of flipping it so it's not their fault, or you're not saying you can't do it. What you're saying is there are extenuating circumstances, and we're here to help.
Yeah, good feedback.
Now, the other thing, too, is I mentioned in the differentiators what sets you apart, because clearly you're going to have deeper knowledge, more experience, the right tools to do this that internally they just won't have. So you don't necessarily have to say that, but you show how deep that is in the differentiators in your evidence section, and that's going to cinch the deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is great stuff. I don't see any other questions coming in, although there may be other questions that will come in. And at this point, I think we definitely would like to encourage everyone to join the LinkedIn discussion. I'll go ahead and post that URL here in just a moment in the Q&A window for everyone so that you can click on over and join Tom on the LinkedIn discussion for continued Q&A. I do have one last one. Can you take one last one, Tom?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go for it, and then we'll wrap up here. So Laura has a question. What would you say is a good proportion is for standardized versus custom content?
That's a great question, Laura. It's hard to say. It depends on the nature of what you're bidding. In some areas, if you're doing a lot of creative work, say you were doing maybe website development in a highly specialized area where you couldn't just use standard templates and reusable tools, but you had to come up with unique things, the volume of reusable content would be less. If you've got a set of products that are pretty much plug and play, it would be much higher. In some companies, we have seen that as much as 90% of the content could be reusable. And in fact, some of our audience may realize that I invented the proposal automation tools that are Proposal Master and RFP Master, which are used by, at this point, hundreds of companies. And it's based on the premise that in some environments, you can just create reusable little chunks of text and plug them in. But in other environments, it doesn't work. If you're responding to very unique IT projects, it may just be areas like answers to the RFP questions, team resumes, case studies, things like that. So maybe 50 to 60% can be reusable. And the solution section and all of the content around that, as well as the executive summary, would have to be kind of one-off, handcrafted. So it's going to vary, depending on the nature of business, but there's a lot that can be done with reusable content. There's no question. And everything I've said should not discourage people from figuring out ways to create repositories of reusable content to make their job easier.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Well, at this point, we are out of time, so we'll have to wrap up here. Great presentation and good discussion.
Thank you, Ryan.
Again,
pleasure.
Thank you as well. We have posted the LinkedIn URL over on the Q&A pane there, so for those of you that would like to join Tom over on LinkedIn, you can follow that here as soon as we wrap up. We'll join over there in probably a few minutes. Give you a little break there, Tom, before you log in. And we would just like to thank you, Dr. Tom Sant, for joining us today on our Time to Thrive webcast series. Just a reminder, this is a webcast series, so there are lots of other great episodes that are coming up, so please be sure to join us on our next episode. Ladies and gentlemen, this will conclude the audio portion of our webcast today. Thank you so much for joining this Academy Live event, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thank you. Have a great day.